I feel like this has never actually occurred to me before until we were talking about this on the podcast. But you were talking about how sex is obviously procreative, but it's also bringing the couple together in that friendship. And it made me think of what Dr. Pat Fagan said when he was on the
Mm,
podcast a few months ago. He was saying that the most important thing that like a parents can do for their children is to love each other. That the love between the husband and the wife does more for the child than the love from each individual parent bestowed on the child.
right.
That the children bask, and the children bask in the love of the
That's
parents.
right.
And so it's so interesting that God created it to an act that will bring the husband and wife together and increase that love so that their child can then bask in the love of the
So we can
parents.
say a child has rights too. And so
Yes.
the child has a right to be welcomed in that union. A child has a right to be engendered in a welcoming environment, engendered, in a home, a womb that welcomes it. You
In
know,
an act of love and not an act of entitlement.
Exactly. And so the right of the child comes into this very much,
Mm-hmm.
and as you just said, and so this is how God has created this wonderful haven, this wonderful environment of love, and to know that every child is welcome. So for parents, to express that, to their children, that that, and for a child as they age to realize that it's by this act, this conjugal love of mom and dad that I have been brought into this world, that they wanted me. They
Mm-hmm.
desired me. They longed for me. And that's something beautiful to know that we're wanted, kind of, in a way, if we kind of turn just for a moment, I think it's Abby Johnson, with the book Unwanted,
Unplanned.
unplanned, sorry, unplanned, but there's a language to of wanted, but yeah, unplanned, sorry. But you look at this as, think about that mindset that creates, that I was unplanned,
Mm-hmm.
when someone says that, when you weren't really begotten, in an open way,
It implies that we didn't really want you.
right? And so, in kind of almost an unwanted, you
Mm-hmm.
weren't wesired. And I guess probably why I'm sticking to that word, but it's maybe change the title of the book. But it does bespeak a language,
Yeah.
And sadly, I've heard children tell me this, that now are adults,
Mm-hmm.
because they realize that that they were not begotten, in a union of love, but in a moment of promiscuity or something. I just bring that up so that we it goes back to what we're talking about, that
Mm-hmm.
a home, a place of safety.
I think it's hard to talk about that in today's society too, because you don't want women to think that the solution to an unplanned pregnancy obviously is abortion. So it's like trying to
Right.
have that tension. There's that tension there between the language of being able to say you don't want to tell a child like, oh, you were unplanned, or using that phrase because you don't want the child to feel like they weren't wanted, but also the flip side to having an unplanned pregnancy isn't abortion.
Right.
So being able to be careful about how we talk about it and
Exactly.
acknowledge that an act like an unplanned pregnancy, especially outside of marriage, obviously that was a sinful
Right.
act, but that child is still needs to be accepted and loved
It's a
and
child of
wanted, and
God.
that the child has a right to
That's right.
live.
That's right. Made in the image and likeness of God. And
Hmm.
so absolutely, no, absolutely. It's always, and I think it just goes back. Contraception opposes the nature of an act.
Hmm.
So by walking into that act already opposed to the fruit
Hmm.
of this act, which so naturally begets a child, if all things, and that, but the mindset is, I'm opposed to that already.
Hmm.
So that leads to the other thing that you've already mentioned. That leads at least to the abortion mindset. But
Hmm.
I admire many women and many men,
Hmm.
who did not intend to become mothers and fathers in
Hmm.
this act, and yet become moms and dads and welcome life.
Hmm.
They understand the responsibility, and they accept the responsibility that this child has been begotten by their own union.
Hmm.
Whether we within marriage or not, that this child is going to be loved nonetheless. And I think that, again, that it recognizes that there's a responsibility and
Yeah.
there's a duty toward this child,